I'm really delighted to welcome to the stage Naveed Khan, who's going to be talking to us about breaking the proverbial glass ceiling. Morning, Naveed.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about breaking the proverbial glass ceiling. And to start off with, I want to talk a little about my background to put things in context. So there's a picture of me when I moved to England from Pakistan, and I was around 10 years old. And as you can see, my mum was fashionably ahead of her times, dressing me in double denim, and that shirt still fits me today. So, so I grew up in Pakistan, came to England around 10, couldn't speak a word of English, grew up in a council estate in Sheffield. And one of my teachers said to me at school, "Oh, well, people like you don't go to university," from Pittsmore and so on and so forth. And I ended up going to a Russell Group University. And I share this story because my dad always used to say to me, if you work hard, you can get anywhere. And I really believed that. I thought merit gets you everywhere in life. And then I had a few different jobs before I went into teaching. And I got into teaching, and I had quite an interesting sort of 9 years in education. So I started off as an NQT, and in my first year of teaching, I had 11 set free, and there were 6 sets, so it was like third set from the top. And at the end of my first year, I achieved the best results in the science department. And after that, in my second year of teaching, I became head of science. And within 3 years, the results went from 27% to 82% with the same team. And I thought, right, I'm going to go. And I started thinking about senior leadership. And every time I mentioned anything to do with senior leadership, I was told, well, no, you don't want to do that. Why would someone like you want to do that? You know, we've had bad experiences with, I mean, one head said to me, we've had bad experiences with an ethnic minority becoming a senior leader, so we're not going to go with you. And I just thought, well, this doesn't make sense. Anyway, I got a break and became an assistant head, and then I moved down south to London and became a deputy head. And the school went from special measures to good in 14 months. Results were the best in the school's history. Science results went from the bottom 20% to the top 20% nationally in 3 years, and so on. And then I started applying for headship. And as I was applying for headship, I got really random and unhelpful feedback. And I'll give you some examples. So one of the interviews I went to, the chair of governors, who's quite well known actually. She's an author, not an author. She's a journalist for The Guardian. I won't mention her name, but on the panel there were 12 white females and 1 male from the local authority, and they were all that was predominantly the governing body. And the school intake had 87% were ethnic minority. The entire leadership team was white. Progress rate score was low. It was minus 0.5 or something. And one of the first question they asked me was, how was I going to bring diversity to the school? Which I found quite ironic, actually. And I said to them, what are you doing? You know, you've got a seat at the table. How are you bringing diversity to the top at this school? And to be honest, they didn't really like that. Then I had another interview. And throughout my career, I kept getting knocked back for really, I mean, it was like I'd go to my trust meetings and I'd be the only ethnic minority senior leader out of 40. I'd go to, even now when I go to meetings, you know, I'm one or two ethnic minorities in the whole audience in these meetings. And, you know, I get asked really random questions like, is the food okay for you? I'm like, it's pasta, you know, and it's vegetarian pasta. Why wouldn't it be, you know? And it's bizarre because, you know, I don't eat curries all the time. It's really random and stuff like I once walked in and went, oh, it's really hot in here today. They went, oh, you must be used to it. I'm like, well, the Sheffield isn't the tropics. And then all the time, one feedback when I got my interview, I had an interview for headship. The feedback I got was, you don't look like a head teacher. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And then another one was, I can't give you a reason why we're not putting you to day 2 because you answered so well. So I just said, stop wasting my time, and hung the phone upon him. I mean, you wasted 2 days of my time. I haven't got time for this nonsense. And put the phone down, because I thought, if you can't give me a reason, you haven't got a reason. You know, you can't just sit there, waste people's time applying for jobs, going through the motions, and then not getting, and then getting really poor feedback. And there isn't really a reason. You can't put your finger on it. Cut a long story short, I'm in my 2nd year of headship now. And, you know, I've gone on, you know, I think all throughout my career being told you're not good enough, or you're not ready, or people like you don't become head teachers, and all of this stuff really has frustrated me. And I feel like now I've got a seat at the table, so to speak, as Michelle Obama says. You know, it's about, you know, voicing those issues that ethnic minorities and people from diverse backgrounds, whether it be, you know, there's a gender gap, there's an ethnic minority gap, you know, when you look at sexual orientation, all of these things, it's about time people spoke up about their experiences in these processes and challenge, you know, people at the table, because that's the only way, you know, getting your voice heard, you know, coaching and mentoring. So, you know, anyone who's in a position of power or influence should be out there trying to encourage more people from diverse backgrounds who are strong and who are credible and have proven track records to go and, you know, really go for these positions. I was speaking recently to Dame Sally Coates, and we were talking about some of the issues around diversity and inclusion. And one of the things that came up was, in London, for example, in Redbridge, all the head teachers in Redbridge are white, and the intake is 88% ethnic minority, but no one challenges a white head teacher to say, you know, you don't represent the demographic. But I'm a head of a school which is predominantly white British, and I've been asked 3 or 4 times now, how can you represent this community? How can you be a head of this school if you don't understand the demographic? And I feel like, but on the flip side, someone who's white, middle class, would never get these questions. You know, you go to Camden, you go to any borough in London, predominantly the head teachers are white, and the intake is pretty diverse, but they don't have those challenges. And it's about raising the profile of this issue of why are people from ethnic minority backgrounds, one, not getting to the top? Why are women, female heads, you know, why is there not enough female heads in secondary schools when the profession has a lot of females in the teaching profession, and so on. So I think things like these platforms give people a voice to kind of challenge the issue, but also forming allies. So it's about getting people who are influential, who have power, who can change this, bringing them to the table to think about how can we do it, not as a tick box exercise, but people who are genuinely talented, how can we support them moving forward? So I'm just going to finish off by saying, if you are applying for senior leadership positions, make sure you prepare for the interview. Of course, if you've got a strong track record, get a coach, but also if the feedback isn't good enough, make sure you challenge that feedback and really back yourself 100%, because I think if you're going for those positions, you're credible, you've got the background, and really back yourselves 100%, because actually you can get knockbacks and it hits your confidence, and sometimes it kind of wears you down. And at one point it did wear me down, and I was about to leave the teaching profession because I just thought, enough is enough, this is not good enough. But actually I'm glad, I dug deep, stuck to it, and and now I'm in my second year of headship. So I'll just move on to questions if anyone's got any.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal narrative, but also that leadership journey you've been on. And we hear this a lot from our network, both within the Women Ed Network, the BAME Ed Network, the Diverse Ed Network, this constant failure, really, of the system to not give good feedback. And I think well done for challenging it, because when we put our hearts and souls into applications and go to interview, the least that the employer can give us is some feedback that is constructive, that can help us. So you've told us about the poor feedback. Have you had any gifts of really good feedback that did actually help you?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually name him Luke Sparks from Dixon's. You know, I owe him a lot actually. So after the interview, there he just spent about an hour and a half feeding back, and after that feedback, I then went on to get my headship, and that was he took his time. He went, you're really credible. You've got a proven track record. There's just certain things you probably need to work on in terms of your answers. Your answers are right. It's how you structure them will be better. And no one ever said that to me. If someone said that to me, I would take that on board. But when all you get is you don't look like a head teacher, well, I can't change how I look. You're too young. Well, you knew that when I applied my date of birth. And so these are things I can't change. But if someone gives you constructive feedback on how to answer a question, how to structure your answers, that's practical feedback that you can put in place and think about. Actually, this is useful feedback, and I can do something with it. And I think I owe a lot to Luke for that feedback, because he did take a lot of time out of his day to give me that feedback, and obviously it made a huge difference to my next interview. But overall, the feedback I've had throughout hasn't. And one school I went to, they gave me their school improvement plan, and I mean, I've never seen something so bad. It was quite poor, and I was really polite about it. I was just like, you're doing an inspection and the percentages don't add up. Like, you're saying 54% of pupil premium, 18% aren't pupil premium. Where are the rest? And then he just got really irate with me and didn't like it. So I was like, well, I'll withdraw, because I don't want to work for you. If you can't accept,
People don't always appreciate the truth, do they, Naveed? Like I was similar. That you're basically challenging when they said to you, what will you do about how will you bring diversity, and when you flipped it on, well, what are you doing about the diversity in this space? Like there's a level of accountability here that we need to put back onto the employer, and so that really really resonates with me. So now you've got this seat at the table. Now you are a head teacher. What are some of the things that you're doing to disrupt the pipeline and to create opportunities for others?
So one of the things is I'm really a strong believer in succession planning, and looking at emerging talent from a wide spread of that. So make sure there's opportunities for women, and that, I've got a head of history actually who's going on maternity leave, and she said, it's her second child. And she always says, as a woman, you have to take a step back in your career. Because you're having a child and so on. So and she's very strong, one of the best history teachers I've ever met. So she's actually shadowing the leadership team and attending leadership meetings, and getting that wider experience before she goes on maternity leave. So when she comes back, there might be if there is an opportunity that actually it is okay to be an assistant head and be part-time. It is, if you're strong and you're credible, and I feel like it's around offering coaching, mentoring, and actually voicing, kind of sharing my story. That I think out of the secondary heads in the group I work for, I think there's only one other ethnic minority head, and I work for quite a large group. So actually sharing the other side of the table, because sometimes people speak for you, don't they? They think this is your experience without realizing, without knowing what your experience is, if that makes sense. And I mean, I went to a conference a few weeks ago, and someone is talking about how difficult it is for ethnic minorities to become heads and so on, but not giving any solutions. So what are we doing? Because what happens is you get to middle leadership level, most people do from diverse backgrounds, and then they just can't get beyond that barrier. And it's about, but why? If they're successful, what are we doing as heads? And people in positions where they can make a difference, how we include those people. Actually, you are good enough. And my head of history said, in her previous school, she never considered student leadership, even though her results were good, her lessons were good, only because everyone's like, well, you're young, you're gonna have a family, and that's not on, is it? It's not fair.
No, it's not, Naveed. And I think the question I want the audience to really take away from your talk is, like, what does a head teacher look like? What does an SLT member look like? We really need to stop our bias here and think about that visible presence and that visible role modelling. So well done for smashing through that glass ceiling, that concrete ceiling, and for owning who you are, but also modelling that there is a way forward for others. It's been absolutely fantastic to meet you this morning. Thank you for sharing your story.